Two people, one religion, opposite actions. So a college kid contacted me a few months ago, not one of the usual folks I talk with. I usually talk with spiritual community leaders. He was a sophomore majoring in environmental studies, specifically ecology, and he found me on YouTube. He reached out with a question, so we had a Zoom. His question was pretty simple. How does spiritual worldview affect how we treat the planet? How does spiritual worldview affect how we treat the planet? Well, our conversation touched on a common Christian narrative. It's all going to burn in the end. You might be familiar. Reason that many Christians see forests and rivers and air as not sacred, more disposable. Well, along the way in the conversation, he told me about a case study, the cleanup of Cancer Alley in Louisiana, communities heavily polluted by petrochemical plants. And what struck him beyond the cleanup was the thinking of those involved. On one side, an oil executive defending the industry. On the other, a lawyer representing sick residents. But both, he said, cited their religion as why they were doing what they were doing. One talked about providing for family, provision, stability. The other about justice and care for the earth. Same religion, opposite conclusions, opposite actions. Well, I told something I think maybe surprised him, that both of these people, I said, were likely operating from what James Fowler once called stage 3 faith. In that stage, as Fowler described it, belief and tribe are inextricably bound together. Belief and tribe are inextricably bound together. I told him about Fowler's research in the 70s. Spiritual journeys, he said, needn't stop there, but that is one of the way stations along the way. He said that there is a spirituality that can be larger than tribe, a way to be spiritual that sees beyond our group's limitations, a way to be spiritual that has a more universal perspective. Now, back when Fowler did his research, he found it was very rare for people to move into those later parts of the journey. But I told this young man, my work helping spiritual leaders reimagine spiritual community has been an effort to make that part of the journey, the part that sees more universally, no longer rare. Because the future, I told him, is going to belong to those who are able to see beyond their tribe. All right, let me review quickly the last episode. Two forces at play in our society, represented by two words: polycrisis, a tangled mess of interconnected troubles, and metacrisis, the crisis under polycrisis, the breakdown in our society of our ability to create shared meaning, a crisis out there, polycrisis, a crisis in here, metacrisis. And that feels heavy. I know it does. But here's some good news. Spiritual communities, as I said last time, are uniquely positioned to help us navigate metacrisis and do it well. Because we already deal in meaning making. We already shape worldviews. We already gather around storytelling. We could just do it better. We are primed for the really important work of updating our old worldview, our old meaning making narrative, the one that is not up to what our world needs now. Anyway, I found Dr. Fowler's work a very helpful roadmap in the years when I was leading our reimagining, deconstructing, reconstructing spiritual community. Now, if you got the online course, it's free, it's on my website. You're already familiar with Fowler, developmental psychologist, Emory University, late 20th century, brought together psychology, theology, sociology, studied how human beings grow through their spiritual journeys, outlined a pattern of recognized, observable way stations along the spiritual journey. Now, his research was pretty focused on Western culture. That's often been a critique of his work, though he did include Native American spirituality into studies. But what I found helpful, despite that critique, was that the stage that he outlined, he called it stage 5, that we're going to focus on in this series, a more direct encounter form of spirituality, a more integrated form of spirituality. We can see the same patterns in that stage 5 show up in Buddhism, show up in Hinduism, in Sufism, in many indigenous traditions. So let's talk primarily about stage 5. And to help us do that, let's distinguish it from what Fowler called stage 3. In stage 3, people gravitate to communities that are organized around sameness. Same beliefs, same ideas, doing the same stuff, listening to the same authorities. And here's the thing, communities built that way work beautifully. Those communities are very stable, very cohesive, have strong moral clarity. Everybody belongs because everybody shares the same identity, everybody tells the same stories, everybody draws meaning from the stories, and all that sameness makes for very stable institutions. I loved being on that part of my journey. I still love the communities that invited me in. But at some point, Fowler calls it stage 4, all of that agreed upon sameness stops working for us. Certainty stops working for us. Now, for a while, we try to find something different to be certain about, but eventually we start to recognize, you know what, it's certainty itself that's the problem. It's certainty itself that's not working for us. Certainty has run its course. It no longer helps us navigate the spiritual life. At that point, rules become less absolute. Authority figures become less reliable. Beliefs we once cherished become less cherished. Once comforting rituals begin to feel hollow. Once sacred texts lose their credibility. Now, going through this, it does not feel like it, but this is normal. It's actually a necessary part of the spiritual journey. Our once solid faith has to crumble to emerge into something on the other side. I remember saying to someone when I was on this part of the journey, man, it feels like I'm squeezing sand in my hands. The more I tried to hold on to my once solid religion, the more it just slips between my fingers. Because of that, stage 4 is hard. It feels like grief and loss. It feels like disillusionment. Sometimes it feels like anger. It's certainly exhausting. Sometimes we become cynical or detached or suspicious. But again, what Fowler's research seems to indicate is that's normal, and it's even necessary. In stage 3, our communities say, we are right. In stage 4, we say to our communities, you are wrong. But then comes stage 5, the one that we're going to focus on in this series. In stage 5, we can hold two seemingly contradictory thoughts and find richness and wisdom in the tension that goes on between those two perspectives. In stage 3, it's a yes-no world. In stage 4, it's a no-no world. But in stage 5, it becomes a yes and world. And the tension between the two is where we find the wisdom. The tension between taking care of family and taking care of the earth becomes yes and. Well, the reason I found Fowler's work such a helpful roadmap in those years leading our community is that I think his individual stages that he described mirror a collective journey that we are all on together. We once had a we are right worldview. We lived in a yes-no world. And then we didn't. We lost absolute truths. We lost leaders that we trusted. We lost shared beliefs. We lost comforting shared rituals. What we're going through together, the metacrisis we described in the last episode, the loss of shared meaning making, Fowler's work suggests that that could be a normal part of growth and development into what we are moving into next. So, Fowler's stages, a roadmap, how we might reimagine spiritual communities that are able to navigate polycrisis and metacrisis, the moment in history in which we live. Now, that fourth stage where everything falls apart, that is difficult to live through at a personal level. It's maybe even more difficult to live through when we're going through it collectively. But when everything is shaking, and goodness knows everything is is also shaking loose. And that research from this academic all those years ago suggests there is life on the other side. Now, as we look in this series at the attributes of stage 5, we're going to be looking at how we can help people in our communities grow into those attributes. Because the work suggests that there is a bigger way to be spiritual. There is a way that is larger than and more universal than tribal sectarianism. There's a way to see a reality larger than tribe, larger than disdain and disillusionment. There's a way to live a broader shared meaning, no longer the one and true truth of my tribe, but a larger wisdom flow of which my tradition is an important part. A wisdom that transcends my tradition, and I am part of a bigger flow. When that happens, the boundaries between us and them begin to soften. They become us, and we become them. We're going to see that. We're also going to see that reality starts to feel more interconnected. The earth can no longer be disposable because it is part of us. It is connected to us. We're also going to see that the other doesn't stay the enemy. We begin to see that our opponents are actually on the same journey we are, just in a different part, seeing from a different perspective. We are going to see an interconnectedness of everything that helps us get more comfortable with paradox, and that we can find in the tension between those different perspectives a wisdom born of synthesis, of living in a both and reality. We're going to be able to ask bigger questions like what serves life, not just what serves my tribe. What serves justice for all, not just for us. What helps the whole web of life flourish. Now, in that Cancer Alley case study, same religion, opposite conclusions, we're going to see in this series that more of the same of that. Stronger tribes, a stronger commitment to the principles of our tribal religion. That is not going to solve our polycrisis, metacrisis problem. But a bigger spirituality could. A bigger sense of us could. So in these episodes, reimagining and rebuilding our spiritual communities, we're going to think about helping our people move into this broader way of being spiritual, this broader way of being human. It's going to be helpful. I sure found it helpful leading our spiritual community for 30 years. I think it's going to be helpful in the next 30 years. Anyway, if you want to follow along, get notified as episodes go live, you go ahead and subscribe.